The taxi app firm Uber is in court today to appeal a ruling which gives their drivers worker status. Uber argues its drivers are self-employed and therefore shouldn't be entitled to rights such as minimum wages and sick pay. Let's think this through. We're going to speak from Central London, discuss this. Chris Bryce, the Chief Executive of the Association of Independent Professionals and Self-Employed, as well as Andrew Pendleton, who's Principal Director for Policy and Advocacy. I'll put my teeth in at the New Economics Foundation. Gentlemen, a very good afternoon to both of you. Chris, let's start with you if we can. How important for all gig economy workers is this appeal ruling when it comes?
Well, I think everything has to be taken on its own merits, Colin. And in fact, the outcome of the Uber appeal may not affect any other gig economy workers. The gig economy is in fact a relatively small part of the 4.8 million or so self-employed people in the UK. And I don't think we should read too much into just one ruling.
Andrew, what might you read into this ruling when it comes?
Well, these platforms will become the dark satanic mills of the 21st century, which is why at the New Economics Foundation we fully supported the judge's ruling a year ago. It's a very clear ruling. We've spoken to drivers who typically work 90 hours a week and maybe earn £5 or less per hour when they're working. So we sincerely hope the appeal court upholds the ruling of a year ago, which was pretty unequivocal, and found that drivers weren't self-employed, were employees of Uber.
Andrew, you've talked to those drivers, as you say. Uber will contend that it's talked to drivers as well, and it finds that 80% of those who work for Uber are very happy with the flexibility. Thanks very much indeed. They like the status quo, don't change anything.
Well, Uber would say that. I mean, we've worked with drivers in London and in Leeds and Bradford, and to be honest, what they prefer is to be more in control of the thing that currently controls their life, which is the app. And so, with Uber now in trouble in London over its licence, looking like it may lose its licence, appealing that decision at the moment, maybe one answer is for drivers to be the controllers of their own app, for a cooperatively owned app of drivers. We've proposed that, called it Cars, which is a bit of a gimmick, but the idea is that it would be driver owned and run, so drivers really would then be in control.
Chris, we hear reports, don't we, of minimum, hourly rates equivalent to about just over £5, below the minimum wage. And that's setting aside all the stuff about sick pay, holiday pay, etc., etc.
I think this might actually be a bit of a red herring. The ideal for Uber drivers is that they have the flexibility to decide their own hours, who they take as passengers, when they sign on to the app or any other app they might use. And in fact, every single driver that I've spoken to, and 5,500 drivers are members of my organisation, are very, very happy with the relationship they have with Uber, and they're very, very happy being self-employed.
Andrew, one group that seems fairly happy are the customers, because if this was such a shameful organisation, you might hope, others might hope too, that Uber, given its troubles elsewhere, might dissuade people from riding in their cars, but there seems to be no evidence of that.
Well, we're not going back, are we, to a situation where Uber and the like don't exist. So the question really is what does a really good version of Uber that works both for the drivers and for the passengers look like? And we think that looks like something in which the drivers have much more control over their working hours and the time that they work, and where passengers are assured of their safety and maybe even prepared to pay £1 or £2 more for their journey as a consequence, because it can't really be desirable for us to get into the back of a taxi and not know for sure if that driver's been sitting in that seat for longer than he really should be. And also some of those issues of the safety of passengers that TfL have raised in the grounds that they've cited for turning down the licence for Uber in London. So there is a mutual interest here between passengers and drivers, and that's in safe taxis where drivers are getting a fair deal and getting a fair wage for their money.
Okay, Chris, I wasn't necessarily going to get into the question of how safe or otherwise Uber are, but Andrew raises the point, and obviously it's been in the news recently, TfL's decision. Andrew makes an interesting point too. If you've got a driver who you don't know how long they've been working for, they may be very tired. That's a safety issue in its own right, isn't it?
Well, yes, it is a safety issue in its own right, but it doesn't apply just to Uber. It applies to every single minicab and indeed black cab driver across the nation. There is no regulation as to hours, and that's something that the various authorities that look after taxi licensing probably should look into. However, I would say that the major concern around whether drivers are self-employed or not is rather a red herring. Minicab drivers and taxi drivers have been self-employed throughout history. The only difference now is people have a platform, and that platform in this case, the case we're discussing, is Uber. That's no different to the two-way radio that my dad used to have to hire for £400 a month back in the 80s.
Andrew, what do you say to that?
I think it is different because the control of that is somewhere a very long way away. Uber drivers complain, for instance, that when they want to raise issues of concern with Uber, they find it very difficult because it's hard to just go and talk to somebody because essentially their lives are controlled by an algorithm and an app. It can't be desirable for people to work 90 hours a week just in order to make ends meet, and even then only get paid £5 less than the minimum wage for that hour, for each of those hours worked. And so therefore, you know, the employment tribunal of a year ago has to be right. These drivers are not self-employed, technically speaking. They are employees of Uber and therefore should get full rights. But perhaps the future is drivers being in more control and being the people who run these apps as well as the people who drive the cars.
Chris, do you recognise that characterisation of Uber as slightly faceless, impersonal, you know, the ghost in the machine, faceless? I mean, you've got Sadiq Khan talking about an army of lawyers and a big PR machine and all the rest of it. They're not in a good place in terms of their reputation, are they?
No, I would agree with that. And I think Uber, I'm not here to defend Uber. What I will say is their drivers enjoy being self-employed. I haven't heard any complaints from them about the money they earn via the Uber platform. And in fact, the figures that I have are probably more than double the £5 that Andrew mentions on an hourly rate. And I think every single driver that we speak to enjoys and values being self-employed. I think the biggest difficulty here is there is no statutory definition of self-employment, and that's something the government really does need to look at, and my organisation has made many recommendations to that end.
Chris Bryce, Andrew Pendleton, this is something we'll return to, I'm sure. Thanks very much indeed for your time this afternoon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.